Ayo Dosunmu is a Chicago Bull. I'm sure he thought about this when he was a kid growing up in Chicago. I always got to tell myself I was watching Michael Jordan grow up. He was watching Derrick Rose, another Chicago native. Of course, Derrick taking a little bit higher, is a little bit of a weight, but the weight was worth it for Ayo Dosunmu. Goes number 38 overall. Second round pick, so the contract not guaranteed. But as I've been hammering home, these early second rounders often get guaranteed contracts, and the Bulls need guards, and I'm sure they will sign him to a multi-million-dollar deal. And I want to talk NBA draft. I want to talk NBA, and I want to talk Ayo Dosunmu with Michael Tulip, my guy. And Mike, man, I feel for you. I want to get out of the way after an early exit. These single elimination tournaments, as you guys knew last year, and as Illinois fans, they're heartbreaking, man. But one bad game at the wrong time. So first time I've caught up with you since then. So I just wanted to acknowledge that. But I think it's great that you guys put this together, and I know it's got to be frustrating that it ended that way.
Yeah, we'll be back. A lot of, I don't want to say soul searching. I'm not sure I'd take it that far over the last 2 days, but I'm telling you, it was a rough,
Yeah.
few days following it. I think ultimately, you have the conversation like with my wife. I mean, she knows how much time was put into it and sacrificing time away from her, and to try to put all that together. And I always say it's an accomplishment to take the court with everything that goes into it, but you obviously want to win. And I think when you look at next year, and it's always crazy talking year three, like 3 days after, but um, I think I kind of told myself, I said, you know what, I would risk the feeling that I had after that game. I would risk having that feeling again in year three, as opposed to playing the what if game and being like, hey, let's hang it up, let's not do it, because the fear of having that feeling again. Um, but you got to run it back. I think the only way to take that taste out of your mouth is to go and do it again. So we'll be back, and I'm sure leading up to it, after the 21-22 season, we'll be talking about it again. I hope people can still support us, despite the loss. We're on the cusp here of continuing to build this, and having a full Illinois alumni team with a lot of the players that'll come available next year. So we'll
Yeah.
dive into that down the road, but it's always fun. It's always fun to play in that tournament, and the beauty of that tournament is, as great as it was last year for us, like, you can experience the other side of it. So we'll be back.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's great that you guys put that together. I know how much time you put into it, man. So I was thinking about you when that happened, but I know how much time I was putting into this moment, right? And not to get selected in the first round. I want to talk to you about that, Mike. But what a moment it is. And I think it's even more special for him, at least, to go to the Chicago Bulls. I mean, Derek Piper's up at the party with a lot of media there tonight. We'll get Io's reaction to it, but that's a special moment for a Chicago kid. And we'll talk about the basketball fit, but I mean, we were getting nervous there a little, Mike. Like, I was confident he'd go in this range, right? I always thought it'd be 20 to 35 or 20 to 40, and he goes towards the end of that. We were starting to get a little nervous as some of these guys are going off the board in front of him, but to end with the Chicago Bulls, man, like that's a storybook kind of thing.
It is, and I think the one thing that I'll get out there before we even really pull this back is to give people an understanding of typically how the NBA draft works. And I think it's very easy to look at it and say, well, this guy went 30th and Iowa went 38th, but Iowa's a better player than this guy. And obviously fit comes into it, but you also got to factor in there are a lot of moving parts leading up to the actual draft when picks are being selected. There's trades that happen, and there was a lot of talk of Io going 22nd to the Lakers, and then you see Russell Westbrook get traded, and that 22nd pick is involved. And here's what happens: a lot of these NBA front offices, they have their big board, right? So, picks 26 and on, in their mind, probably they're saying, okay, I would assume who's gone. Like, from what we're hearing, he's going to the Lakers at 22. So we're gonna develop our big board based off of that information. And when these things happen on draft day and Russell Westbrook gets traded to the Lakers, 22 pick goes out the window for Io. you tend to slide because a lot of these teams have their big boards made up. And I think the worst thing to do during the draft, if you're a top 10 pick, you pick, people call it BPA, best player available. Um, really what the Warriors did tonight with Kaminga. And for Io, that's where those slides happen, is when you're slated to go, you know, 22nd, let's call it, and you have a Russell Westbrook type trade happen. And now, 26, 27, you talk about the Knicks, you talk about the Denver Nuggets, the 76ers picked in that range. They all have their big board, right? We're picking Bones Highland, we're picking Quentin Grimes, and if they're available, we're taking them. And if Io wasn't part of the equation because they thought he was going to go earlier, he's going to end up sliding. Instead of going from 20 to 25, he goes 35 to 40 because all these teams have slated these picks. And obviously, it ended up working out well for him. I think you can talk about fit, from a schematic standpoint, from a roster standpoint, but I love the fact he's under Billy Donovan's tutelage,
Yeah.
to be honest. I think that's a great marriage. I think Billy Donovan's a guy, he's tough, he's hard nosed. And I think that really coincides with who Io is as a player. So beyond just what it is from a roster standpoint and how he factors into that rotation, I really, really like the marriage there. But I just wanted to stress, for anyone that may be listening to this questioning, man, how does a potential National Player of the Year candidate go 38th in the draft? And that's just kind of how the draft works. It's a very, very, it's not this kind of surface level. Well, hey, this guy's better college statistics, better XYZ. Like, they have their big boards in advance. This is what they've been doing. Not only just during the college basketball season, but even during these pre-draft workouts.
Yeah, one thing you kind of started to mention there, like some of the places he was projected to go, like the Knicks were a team that was interesting for him. Like I've talked earlier in the week about how I just loved his fit with Thibs. And I like the idea of him keeping the orange and blue and playing in New York City. But you saw some other teams. LA traded out of that one with the Russell Westbrook deal. The Clippers traded up. I believe that was the Keon Johnson, right? And then you saw Utah, I believe, traded out. Phoenix traded out. Milwaukee traded out of 31. And those were a lot of the places that people were saying that's where he could go. And those were really, really good fits, I thought. But the other thing is, this isn't about like, what was your college stat line, right? Like when Franz Wagner went number 8, and listen, I'm not trying to talk down to Illinois fans, but most hardcore Illinois fans don't seem to be huge NBA fans, right? They love the college game. They love the fan bases, the history of it, the pageantry of it, and they love the NCAA tournament, right? And I love all those things too. That's why I love college basketball. But the NBA is a different game, and it's a traits game, right? Like you got to have elite traits. And talking with Mike Schmidt said it tonight. He's good at everything, but not maybe that one elite trait. You could say transition, but that's a smaller part of the game, right? And then I talked with Kyle Boone. He said B+ at everything, maybe not an A at one thing. And sometimes that can hurt you if you just have Franz Wagner, who's 6'9" and an elite defender, right? Or Franz Wagner, who can handle at 6'9". Like that length and that defense are elite traits, and he could be a two-way player. So that's why a guy who wasn't as good in college, he was a great college player, Franz Wagner, didn't produce against Illinois. I understand that. But it's a different thing you're looking at. So some of these guys you've never heard of. I know Kai Jones wasn't a great college player. I would assume he was a far better college player. But what do you project to be in 3 or 4 years? Can you be a star in the league? And that's what those teams are looking for in that top 20, 25 especially.
Yeah, and you mentioned it's translatable. What are your translatable traits? What are your translatable skills? And for a guy like Franz Wagner, and you and I talked about this earlier, I guess in Illinois fans' defense, he didn't play well against Illinois. So if that's the only
points in 3 games. So yeah,
right.
if that was all you saw Franz Wagner, you're probably like, this guy's not very good.
I think he's not very good, but you look at him and you're talking 6'9", almost 6'10", great stroke, can defend at a high level. He's a plug and play kind of guy, especially in the NBA. And you've even seen, the lineage just with his brother. His brother has, I wouldn't say has had like a overwhelmingly successful NBA career, but the dude's still in the NBA, and he's clearly valued, and he's now joining up with his brother in Orlando. So it's weird because when you look at, by some people's logic, Jimmer Fredette should be an NBA All-Star right now. Lester Hudson, who played back in the late 2000s, I guess early 2010s, averaged, 27, 28 points a game in college. Like, well, he should also be, it just, sometimes it doesn't work like that. And when you don't have translatable skills. Kendrick Nunn went undrafted, but the thing that has propelled Kendrick Nunn to stay in the NBA is he is terrific in ball screens. Yeah. He's terrific. Like, and that is something that I think Ayo excels at as well. And I think it's something that when he gets to the NBA and has a chance to handle it and come off of ball screens, Illinois ran a fair amount of that. I say fair amount. I mean, they were top 10 in the country, if not top 5 in the country in their ball screen usage. And I think that's something that contributes not only just for Ayo, but you talk about the Andre Curbellos of the world too. Like the way that Illinois runs their system and being very ball screen heavy is something that feeds into prepping these guys to play at the next level. And I'll say this before we even dive even further. I've always been a big believer that talent and skill gets you drafted, right? But character and a personal investment in your own development keeps you in the league. And the thing for Ayo is that he checks he has the talent and the skill, but he also checks those latter 2 boxes as well, with the character and the investment in his own development. Because I mean, just to break it down, you got to think, 38th pick, hopeful that he cracks the rotation, but if you're the 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th guy on an NBA roster, what can end up happening is, as opposed to the guys that maybe go overseas or in the G League that are playing and starting and playing 30 minutes, like there's plenty of NBA players that have had it in the past where if you haven't invested in your development previously, it's a shell shock when you get to the NBA because you're on your own. And for a lot of these teams, you're traveling, you're going from Atlanta to flying out to Portland to start your West Coast road trip. So when you land, you're going to do a light practice, and then you're going to play, and then you're going to go play in LA the next night. And then you're going to fly again to Phoenix, and you're going to do a light practice. And the development, guys can plateau. Like, especially if you're not a guy that's playing 25, 30, 35 minutes. If you're a guy that's at the back half of the rotation or maybe getting minutes sparingly, you have to have a focus on your own personal development as a player, any way that you can get it. Some of that is just working with the player development guys on the team. Some of that is taking your own initiative. And I always go back to the culture that Brad Underwood and Illinois has created, where it is a culture of development. And a lot of guys aren't equipped with that when they go to the league. And that's part of the reason why they end up struggling. So I think Ayo is incredibly well positioned, not only just being at home, but also, he's comfortable. I'm sure he knows a few of those guys on the Bulls as well, whether it's Kobe White or some of these other guys. I'm sure he's crossed paths with them. And the comfortability aspect of it is another thing that I think can't be talked about enough, as opposed to, maybe, I mean, Myers went through it. Right. I know I'm just kind of going off on a tangent and talking, but Myers went through it. Myers from Robinson, Illinois, went to Illinois, and it's like, hey, you're in Portland by yourself. He has that support system around him. I see the videos tonight. I mean, that it was there at full capacity in that restaurant that he was at. So he's going to have no shortage of opportunity to develop himself. And luckily he's a guy that is already ingrained in him, and that's what he does. So I'm excited.
Why do you think he slid, if we want to use that term, to 30 outside of the board thing you were talking about? Like, you see some of the guards that went ahead of him, and even for me, for some of these at some point I was like, that's interesting. But I mean, all these guys were good college players: Cameron Thomas, Nashawn Highland, Quentin Grimes, Jaden Springer. Like, this was a draft where I think the strength was the top 5, right? And then you had kind of the middle that was okay, but I thought the bottom half, like from 20 to 40 of guards there, that was a really good group of guards. And I think it was just kind of pick your flavor there.
Yeah, I agree. And going back to what I said earlier, part of sliding in the draft sometimes is just, it's kind of just unlucky. I mean, you get a couple trades that come in and you slide because guys already have their big boards made up and weren't factoring you in because they thought that you were going earlier. And then on draft night, I think a lot of those teams in the back half of the first round, you kind of want to stick to your guns a little bit. And you've done your research on this guy. You've done all your homework, so you want to end up drafting him. And I also think for Io, when you factor in, sometimes age can play a factor into that, but at the same time, I think things are changing in that regard where it's not as taboo to take a guy that's a little bit older, because I just think the shelf life for NBA players is a little bit longer now, as opposed to, hey, we got to get this 18, 19-year-old because he's going to give us XYZ amount of years. Whereas you could get a 23-year-old that could play, you know, 12, 13 years in the league and be productive. So I think from an actual player standpoint, um, I think Io's end-to-end speed with the ball, especially. You talk about secondary transition opportunities, secondary fast break opportunities in the NBA. I think that's going to be an aspect that he flourishes in, especially with more spacing. All of that factors in. The big question mark, and I know he did it at a pretty decent clip this year. But his outside shooting, I think, is going to determine his outside shooting, and his ability to guard multiple positions is going to ultimately determine what his longevity is
Mhm.
in the NBA. And if he can be just a knockdown, open 3-point shooter, that extends we talk about the 3-and-D guys, like that extends his shelf life. And he got to showcase that a little bit this year. And he's going to have open shots, and I think honestly, if Vucevic stays in Chicago, like that's another big piece for him, where you have and no slight against Kofi, but Vucevic is a better passer. So passing out of I mean, I don't think I'm going on a limb saying that, and Kofi may agree with that as well. But I think you're able to position yourself, and I think the thing that is going to separate Io is just from getting to know him a little bit and hearing everything that comes out of the Illinois locker room. There are some guys, especially second round picks that are maybe 8th, 9th, 10th guys, and we'll see what he ends up being in that rotation, that aren't used to the role that they're playing and maybe aren't accepting of the role that they're playing. And I think that's when I keep tying it back to character. Like, this guy is going to be able to come in, and whatever role you put him in, he's going to do his best to excel in it. And that is so valuable for a lot of these NBA teams. Like, that's what they're looking for is, hey, yeah, everybody loves being the guy.
Right.
Like I talk to people all the time where it's like, oh yeah, no, he was a great teammate. Like, well, of course he was a great teammate. He was getting all the shots, and what did he have to? Whereas like the guy who's the 5th, 6th, 7th guy, that's where you're like, I didn't really think he was a great teammate because he's not accepting of his role. But Io is such a great teammate, such a great locker room guy, and he's going to be in a different role in Chicago. But I think just his character and his ability to adapt and his investment in himself, just from a development standpoint, is really what's going to take him to the next level. But I'll wrap it back to, he can knock down open shots and he can defend multiple positions. I think he's gonna have a 8, 10, 12-year career in the NBA.
Yeah, you're kind of almost like describing basketball character there, which is like work ethic, drive to get better, attitude with your role, not starting off thinking you're going to be a star. Because Ayo Dosunmu is not going to be the star guy in the NBA, right? Like that's not what his role is going to be. But it reminds me of a guy you and I were texting about earlier, is Jalen Brunson. Was the star, as a junior on a national championship team, gets drafted in the second round. And what a nice piece he is next to Luka Doncic, right? Just as a guy off the bench, controls games, and just has a maturity beyond his years on the court. I think Io has some of that as well. Maybe not as good of a point guard as Jalen is, but Io is obviously longer, can defend better. And yeah, my thing, I think he could take another level defensively. Right. Like, I think there are times he is a defender that just wrecks havoc. And there are other times I think he can be a little bit better at that. The 3-point shot, like, Mike, you're a shooter, so I want to ask you this. He does have a weird looking shot, right? Like it's a little bit lower in a set shot, it feels like, but he did get a heck of a lot better during his career, and that's what you like to see, is that trajectory of improving your game. So what are the things you think he'll have to overcome to, I think he's going to stick in the league. I think he'll make the progress, but what are the areas of progress you think he has to make?
Well, you mentioned just mechanically his jump shot, and he's made so many strides since he got to Illinois. But I really do believe that even if you have more of a set shot, even if you have more of a herky jerky release, which he's really shored up, there's still a place for you in this league. I mean, look at Tyrese Halliburton. I mean, Tyrese Halliburton has the set shot of all set shots, and the dude shot like 45% from three this year because he's extremely savvy in how he gets those. And I think that's a very underrated part of basketball, is learning how to position yourself for open shots, and learning how to, okay, and it all comes with chemistry, right? Like, okay, I know that if Vooch takes this one dribble and wants to go left shoulder, if I'm on the wing, I need to get in his view and shift down to the corner. I need to shape up from the corner. If to get in the view of the passer, and all of that becomes, will be something that's a little bit different for Ayo, because he's been more of, more on the ball, but also, drive and kick threes. And I think I'll also go back. You mentioned Jalen Brunson, and I've known Jalen for almost a decade now, and very similar to Ayo in terms of his just willingness to really do whatever it takes, number one, to win, but just kind of be an all-star in his role.
Mhm.
And I think that's what Jalen's been able to do. But also, the correlations between what Jalen did at Villanova and what Ayo did at Illinois, Jalen shared those ball handling duties with Ryan Arcidiacono. And Ayo shared those ball handling duties with Andre Curbelo. So as opposed to being just this ball dominant 40 minutes a game, always had the ball, don't really know what he can do without the ball. Like, Ayo proved that this year, that he can be effective without the ball, because Curbelo was the one that was handling it a lot of times. And it's the same thing with Jalen. Now he comes into the league and he's got a Luka Doncic next to him, and he can be that off ball guy. Like, he can be that Derek Fisher, so to speak. And I think Ayo is one of those guys too. Obviously, when you make a comparison to like a Derek Fisher, I mean, just kind of being able to be in the right spot, be tough, be gritty, knock down open shots, and then be counted on. I mean, Derek Fisher was a guy that hit big shots in big moments, and I think that's another trait too, that when you've done that in the past, you're not afraid of those moments when they come, especially in the NBA. And there's going to be moments during the regular season where you'll have a chance to prove that. And I firmly believe that could happen for him this year. And it's exciting, man. I mean, I think it's weird, like the change in, energy, where it was like, what's going on? Like, Ayo, like he's sliding and this and that. And then it's like, hell yeah, he's going to the Bulls. Like, it's just like, it's really funny. I think it's going to be neat for a lot of these people that are Illini fans that maybe, don't see the NBA as much, but may have vested interest now,
Yeah.
watching the Chicago Bulls and Ayo play. And like, hey, if you watch the NBA, it is a fun game, and it is a very, very intricate. They run just incredible sets, and just watch the defensive switching without even saying a word. I mean, it is the highest level of basketball. And Jeremy, you and I talk about all the time.
Beautiful game, man. It's just
It's unfathomable to just be like, yeah, I can't watch this. So
let's get into this, Mike. Okay, I just want to bring this up because there are so many Illinois fans that hate on the NBA. Just hate on it. Like, and they talk about it like it's I lost, like, after the Jordan era, I was still like a young kid. So I was still like Elton Brand, Tyson Chandler, Eddie. I was so into it. And then I kind of lost, a lot of interest. I got to watch it a little bit, but it just felt like the game wasn't as good. Like the quality of play wasn't as good. The drafting was off. You're getting a bunch of high school kids in at that time. But like, it's still just such an unbelievable game, and it's more skilled than ever. The talent is unbelievable. Like, if you'd have dropped Kevin Durant in 1982, like I can't, they would be like, what is this? Or Giannis at that time. It's unbelievable what these guys can do now. But like, I get it because it's millionaires, right? Like, so people don't like millionaires. It's an 82 game schedule. So some games the stars don't play, right? There's some flaws in the NBA about that. But once you get to the playoffs, man, or you get a big game between these good teams, it's the best basketball in the world. And I think basketball is the most beautiful sport in the world, just with everything that's happening, and see guys do what they do. Like Steph is ridiculous, right? And it's not just those guys. It's like you can get a guy go for 40 points one night that's like a backup, and it's all these guys are so dang good. So I get it. You love your game. You love college ball. Maybe you think it's more pure or whatever it is, but that's not going to be the case anymore. So it's just I don't get why people wouldn't watch the NBA, like especially after the finals we just had.
And I think you and I think went on had like a Twitter thread going one time. Maybe it was like a couple years ago, and I made the comment. I forget exactly what I said, but people tend to fall in love with college basketball because more error leads to like crazier things happening.
Unpredictability, right? Especially with the
unpredictability. Like, this guy turns it over. Luka Garza just went to the Pistons. Anyways, but the unpredictability is what kind of draws people in because it becomes more entertaining, so to speak. Like you have a guy turn it over at this point of the game, like on an inbounds pass, and it's mayhem and it's crazy. Like the Coke Arena in Wichita is going nuts because this guy just like saved it under his own basket and a team laid it in to win. You're like, God, like, does it get any better than college basketball? It's like, well, I mean, that was a horrendous turnover. But then when you watch the NBA, I think the one thing that I'll always go back to, I mean, when I'm prepping for the TBT, and maybe this is like the wrong time to mention this given what happened a few days ago, but I have like a synergy edit of like 75 to 100 out of timeout, opening plays that are run in the NBA. And I truly believe, like, Jeremy, maybe one time you and I can do this. Yeah. I'll just like share my screen and go through these plays and like what Brad Stevens was trying to expose and how he did it. And it's just like, it's insane. I mean, it is insane how good they are at exploiting mismatches. And I think the one thing about the NBA that they do is, for as high level as players are and how talented and skilled they are, they tend to also, stick with what's simple as well. And what I say is like, hey, if Brook Lopez is in the game and he wants to go into drop coverage every single time, drop coverage meaning, hey, I'm guarding a ball screen, I'm just retreating towards the basket trying to keep my man in front of me. Like, if Brook Lopez is going to do that, we're just going to continue to run a high ball screen until they take Brook Lopez out of the game because we're exploiting it. And I think that's how the NBA works sometimes. But the chess match within the game is just what is so neat about it. And you're talking about the best players in the world, the most elite level athletes in the world. So how can you configure a scheme, and how can you configure some set actions, out of timeout actions, to be able to exploit these guys that are like at the top, at the pinnacle of their game? And that's what's so, I don't even care. Like, I'll watch the Minnesota Timberwolves versus the Charlotte Hornets in the middle of February, and like you can find some really good stuff watching that game, and it's amazing. I even think back to a specific play you're watching in the bubble, and the Toronto Raptors are on defense, and if you can envision this, Norman Powell is guarding the corner, okay, and Marc Gasol is on the block. His man is about to go into a high ball screen. Norman Powell's in the corner. Marc Gasol is about to go guard a high ball screen. Now, in order for them to not put Marc Gasol in the Brook Lopez situation, without even saying a word, the second Marc Gasol's guy runs up to go set a high ball screen, Norman Powell sprints over to take Marc Gasol's guy and guard off the ball screen so that they can switch. Then Marc Gasol takes the corner, and after that big man rolls, the guy that Norman Powell switched with now switches back onto the guy Norman Powell was guarding in the corner, and Marc Gasol gets back to another big. So it's like that stuff that you watch, you're like, that doesn't happen at the college level. Not only does it not happen, but like to instinctively, like Marc Gasol just looked at Norman Powell and was like, go.
Yeah.
and they just did it and they switched back, and it's insane how high level it is. And those are the things that you appreciate about it. Look at this. My wife.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, Luka Garza just got picked. She said, no, the Big Ten, by the way, is owning the second round.
Second round is Big Ten territory.
Owning it. Just to run down, we're almost done with the draft. But all right, the second round, Dosunmu goes 38. My guy, Wieskamp, I love him. Spurs take him at 41. Livers from Michigan goes 42. Delano Banton goes
Yeah, how about it?
46 out of Nebraska. Nebraska guy before a Maryland guy or Garza, but Luka Garza just went at 52 out of the Detroit Pistons. We haven't seen Aaron Henry go yet. We haven't seen Wiggins go from Maryland as well.
I got to think Wiggins is coming soon. I think he had a heck of his pre-draft workouts, his G League combine, his NBA combine. You know, I thought he really did well for himself. I think a lot of people like Bantam too. I mean, he's you watch him in Nebraska, and part of it too, when you're on a horrendous team, it doesn't help you. But you talk about, like, we go back to Franz Wagner. You could look at Delano Bantam and be like, well, his team stinks, but hey, the dude's 6'8", 6'9", can handle it. Long, competes defensively when he wants to. Like, there are a lot of translatable skills, and like that's the name of the game in the NBA, and it's the reason why Michael Carter Williams went so high. It's the reason why a lot of these guys who have the wingspan, the height, the athleticism, the IQ, like those guys are going to go high in the draft and get drafted if you're a guy like Delano Bantam. So like, I'm happy. I'm happy for the Big Ten. Having a good showing. I know they went just one guy, just Wagner in the first round, right? It's kind of funny. I think now you look at it and they've been known in the
had
second
seven. Yeah, the SEC had seven guys. I do want to get to the Bulls, like how he fits the Bulls here coming up. So let's do that. Let's take a quick break and we'll get to that. All right, Mike. We know a little bit about the Bulls. I watch them a little bit. They've been frustrating to watch the last couple of years, but they did need a guard. They needed a longer guard, I think, to pair next to Zach LaVine, who's taken some strides defensively, but that's never been his thing. But he's one of the best bucket getters in the NBA. Vucevic is a really interesting player. If nobody's watched him, he's so skilled at the center position, shoot, rebound, and really distribute well. It's kind of a point center, kind of like Joakim used to do back in the day. But Jokic does it a little bit. He's got a little bit of that to his game and a really good shooter. But so they're in win now mode, but they got to go get a point guard. They're going to add somebody in free agency. So it's not like Io is their answer here, but they need somebody to play next to Kobe White, who's a little bit smaller. At least he's a little longer than I think, but he's about 6'4", 6'5", but really an offensive guy, kind of a microwave offensive option. Tomas Satoransky is kind of their starting point guard, who's kind of like Io, but he's only got 1 year left on his deal. They're probably going to try and go out and get Lonzo or Spencer Dinwiddie or some free agent to be their starting point guard. But, you look at LaVine, White, and if they can add Alonzo or somebody like that, that obviously would be tougher for Io, but he kind of fits what they're looking for at that point guard position with two other off guards who really aren't point guards.
Yeah, no, I think it's set up pretty well for Io to come in and at least have an opportunity. I think that's all you really want. Like, nothing's ever set in stone, but if you have an opportunity to come in and contribute in any way your rookie year, it's a success. I mean, you look at even just kind of their top five guys with Vooch, LaVine, Thaddeus Young, Satoransky. I think the underrated part about Satoransky, I was actually talking about this with Brandon Paul the other day. I think a lot of people were comparing Josh Giddey to Satoransky, and Satoransky's like a freak athlete. I don't think people understand that. Like, he is a much better athlete than people give him credit for. And he's tall, he's whatever he is, 6'7", has a lot of size. But I think the depth on this team, and Kobe White is like I don't even want to say an undersized shooting guard, because the dude's 6'5".
Right.
He's probably one of the more like deceivingly 6'5" people of all time. But he's a guy that can play with Io. Like even if you, I'm even envisioning a scenario, and a lot of this comes down to guys competing on the defensive end. But there's a scenario where whoever they get in free agency from a point guard perspective, there's a scenario where you could have that point guard, Kobe White, and Io on the floor at the same time. Like that's not out of the realm of possibility. Obviously, Denzel Valentine's going to be gone. Garrett Temple's contract's up. Daniel Tice is going to be gone. I know Troy Brown's on the books for another few years, but I think, like I said, his Io's ability to come in and knock down open shots and defend at a high level is going to determine just how much time he gets with this team. I think he's going to get time regardless, but him doing those two things is going, and him remaining efficient in certain ball screen scenarios. I think those things are going to determine the difference between 10 minutes and 18 minutes, or 10 minutes and 20 minutes. And I think that is a massive gap. But he's more than capable of it. But I just like the pieces that they have. They're a good blend of, you got the vets with I say vets with Vooch. Vooch isn't even really that old. Levine's been in the league for a while. Thad Young's obviously a pretty seasoned vet. But then they got the blend of the youth with Kobe White and Patrick Williams, and Troy Brown's on the younger side. I like the mix that they have, and quite frankly, I like the mix that they have for Iowa to come in and kind of do what he does. I don't think, like we talked about, he's not going to be a starter by any means. But you never know what can happen throughout the course of a season with injuries, and it's a really long season. And I think the one thing that I think we've all learned especially with Iowa, is like, you can't count the dude out.
Right.
You just can't. So he has those traits that I mentioned earlier, with the character and with that personal investment in his own development, and that's so critical for a guy in his position right now. And I truly think that if he checks those boxes, he's going to not only be in position to contribute for the Chicago Bulls immediately, but he's going to position himself to have a long NBA career.
Yeah. So I guess for him, now that he moves forward, like who do you see in the NBA, just for fans that might not watch a lot of it, that's a model for him of what his career could be, like, development wise?
Yeah, I mean, I think the one that you hear the most is Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. And I think a lot of that is just due to the size and that comparison there. Shai's a little bit of a better athlete. But at the same time, he's really carved out a role of being a guy that can be on the ball, handling the ball, coming off ball screens, and then being a guy when a Chris Paul comes to town in Oklahoma City, where he can play off the ball. And if you're versatile in that way, you become a guy that can be put on the floor in multiple situations. And I look at another guy, even a guy like Terrence Mann. I mean, we talked about, we talked about what he was able to do with the Clippers this year, and really, like, his bread was buttered when he's just knocking down open shots and defending and playing with high energy. Like, his performance in the playoffs, like, he wasn't reinventing the wheel. Like, he was stepping up, knocking down shots, using his length, using his size, being physical defensively. And I think those are the types of things that, like I said, I mean, that creates longevity in the league. So you look at those types of guys, and Io's a unique player because, I'm not gonna say he's like one of a kind, but at the same time, we mentioned, and I think, you had put out the article earlier of kind of, hey, he's got, all these B+ intangibles and skills. And I think if he can develop himself into creeping into that A- range in any of those facets, like, again, he extends that shelf life, and I think he becomes even more valuable to put on the floor in really any situation. So the player comparison thing is always tough because a lot of that depends on situation. A lot of it depends on what your role is within the team. And I look at those two guys as kind of being like I wouldn't say like a ceiling and a floor, because I mean, even if your floor is Terrence Mann, the dude just had like 37 in like a conference finals game. So Yeah, I think it's all going to come down to situation. It's all going to come down to people talk about fit a lot, and I think I'm really happy that he's going to an organization where you got a Billy Donovan that coached Shea Gilgeous-Alexander.
Yep.
So I think there's some similarities there, and as Aaron Wiggins goes off the board to to the Thunder, there's a ton of similarities, and I think Iowa's going to be in a position where um, it's a franchise that seems to really be getting their, if you will, with their front office and with Billy Donovan at the helm. So I think that's all going to contribute to fit and to what his longevity is in the NBA.
Do you look at this draft like I'm looking at the second round guys who have gone off the centers? Because I'm thinking about Kofi, Neemias Queta from Utah State. He was 7', 245, goes number 39. Garza goes 52. Obviously, a very different player than Kofi. Charles Bassey, a little similar, not as big, 6'11, 235. And a kid from Seton Hall, Sandro Mamakulashvili. That's kind of like Georgie, 6'11", 240.
Georgie's guy. Georgie's guy out of Seton Hall, yeah.
Yeah, looks like Georgie a little bit too. So yeah, he was the Co-Big East Player of the Year. I mean, do you look at that and think anything with Kofi, or is it just a completely different thing next year for him?
He's in a unique position because he's a unique player, and even when you look at a lot of these guys like Sandro from Seton Hall, like he's 6'11", and he's so versatile. He's versatile in a way where he's not necessarily stepping out and just consistently knocking down threes. But he's a little more nimble on his feet. He defends at probably a little bit of a higher level than Kofi. But even guys like Charles Bassey from Western Kentucky, or you keep going down the list. I know we had mentioned a few of these guys that have gone tonight. And it almost ties back to the Io thing. Like if you're not an elite, and Kofi has elite size, there's no question about that. Like you just simply can't teach those things. But and I've said this a lot, like just as these guards, just as the Kendrick Nunns of the world break their way into the NBA by being so efficient in ball screen situations offensively, if you're a big, you have to be efficient in ball screen situations defensively, or tie it back to the Brook Lopez thing. We can't keep you on the floor much. And I know they won a title, but a lot of that, you had to factor in, okay, we got to play Bobby Portis a little more. Like we got to have guys that are, and ultimately, if you want to stay on the floor, you have to have certain traits where like, hey, we can't take you off the floor. And Kofi's just in a unique position, like with his size, and it's tough to say, well, he only does this. He only scores in the paint, and if Kofi started just chucking threes, you'd be like, dude, get your ass in the paint. So it's tough because you can't have your cake and eat it too when you talk about evaluating a guy where, right now he's, second team All-American, did so much damage in the paint, scored at a high clip because it's what is required of him for his team. And I also think it plays to his strengths. So, you can't try to reinvent the wheel if you're Kofi. And I think that's a really dangerous thing to do if you say, hey, like, well, I need to develop a 17-footer. I need to start making plays on the perimeter. Like, yeah, but at the same time, if you don't show that you can excel at those things, then you're actually dropping your stock even more. But part of that is kind of dipping your toes in the water and trying to figure out if those are things that you can begin to excel at. And I think the best thing that you can do is just become experienced with those things. So I think it was a great decision personally for him to come back. NIL obviously plays a factor in that. But at the same time, I think it's a chance for him to really continue to get his feet under him in terms of what his identity is as a player. I think we all know what it is. But I think he's going to be able to experience a little bit this year. There's potential, maybe they run some more 5-out stuff where they get him on the perimeter, and don't freak out. I mean, that doesn't mean that's Kofi jacking up threes and like turning into Nikola Jokic out there, but getting him comfortable being out there. And maybe it's a 5-out situation where, you're running more drag ball screen situations where, the point guard can dribble down, and instead of Kofi rim running, he's starting out, at the top of the key, setting drag screens over by the wing and then rolling hard. I mean, that's going to be certain situations where you just have to feel it out. And I think as he goes through this year, and he looks like he's slimmed down even more just through that pre-draft process, which I think has helped him a lot. And it'll be interesting to see his progression. It's hard because a lot of those guys that are pigeonholed into being, hey, I'm just like this dominant big man that camps out in the paint and, protects the rim a little bit. It's tough because you want to stick to what you're good at, but at the same time, you don't want to overdo it and start to overextend yourself into dipping into inefficient areas.
Yeah, like for me, I think of three things I want him to do. Like one is make free throws because he's shown he can do it.
Yeah, oh yeah,
he didn't last year, right? Two is pass. Like I think that's almost more important than shooting 15-foot jumpers. Like I just think he's got to pass better and set up some shooters and it's becoming more where a big man can initiate offense, like kind of at the the foul line there. The other is maybe like a baseline jumper, right? Like just something small that you can extend just a little.
Maverick Morgan.
Yeah, like just made a college career out of that, right? Let's think back to that Rutgers triple overtime, the Mav game. Unbelievable. All right, let's get some final thoughts, Mike. Appreciate your time. I know it's late again. This is what we always do. But some of my favorite draft picks tonight, and not that these are top 10 picks, but Evan Mobley at number 3 feels like a steal. Like he just two-way player. Like at worst, I think you got an elite defender who can guard everybody on the court. At best, I think you got a star, like a superstar in the league, like a top 20, top 15 player. Jalen Suggs falling to 5 to Orlando, who never has guards who can shoot. Like I think that's a really, really good thing. And then I didn't care where he went to, but he went to a team that really needs defense. But Davion Mitchell at 9. Like I don't know what his ceiling is in the NBA, but I just want that guy on my team. So I love those 3 picks. I don't know if there was any later outside of Iowa to the Bulls, of course, that really got me going. But those 3 picks, I just think those teams outside of Cade Cunningham to Detroit, I felt those teams got to feel pretty good.
Yeah, I thought, you mentioned it with Mobley. Sometimes when I look at these kind of wiry big men that have that skill, you almost look at them and say, hey, do they have a frame that you can build upon? And I think he has that. Yeah. I think he has kind of broader shoulders and some of the Kevin Durant's of the world, like they just kind of are what they are from a frame perspective. But I think Mobley, and you can see even just with his brother, with Isaiah, I mean, like he has a frame that you can build upon. And I even with Jalen Suggs, you mentioned it, he's a guy that you could probably pick like 5 out of the last 10 drafts. The guy probably goes number 1. Mm-hmm. He's that good. And they flash a stat just, tonight in their 10 games against high major Division I opponents. He led Division I with, 25 points a game against those high major Division I opponents. So like, he's so special. And I even think I love the Scotty Barnes pick. And I know you look at his numbers, I think he's 27% from 3 this year, but he's a guy and it's so valuable. He competes and you can run offense through him. And I say through him, I don't necessarily mean like he's the guy, but you don't have to configure your offense in a way where you're like, okay, well, we can't run this because then that means, and it's the same thing with Kofi, like trying to figure out situations where Kofi can become a guy where you aren't trying to work around him when it comes to having to get through your sets. And when I say get through your sets, I mean like, okay, we're going to swing it here, and then this guy's going to pop and catch. And like, if this guy is a non-passer, you don't want to put him in a position to complete your set play.
Because the ball dies with Kofi, right? Like, and that's not a bad thing all the time, but the ball movement stops and the defense sets, right? Like,
and Kofi's greatest strength is it can sometimes be his greatest weakness, because you look at a guy like Kofi and he can command a double team and still score.
Right.
So that's the problem, where like some guys that can't score over a double team start to learn how to pass out of the post because they have to, like that's their only option. But Kofi Kofi's a guy that can score on two people, literally. And so he's never had to be like, you know what, I'm at a, in a position of weakness here. I got to pass it out. But even just going back through the draft, like I'm a Warriors guy, and I wanted Davion Mitchell so bad at number 7. Like I just want him plug and play. Like we mentioned it with Wagner, like plug and play, a guy that can come in. He shot at a high clip this year. He can guard at a high level, and I think what makes these guys so valuable, especially Davion Mitchell, is if you can prove that you can guard opposing point guards, and it's a point guard league. I mean, there's no nights off in the NBA from the point guard position from a defensive standpoint. But I love Chris Duarte as well. I think that was a great pick for the Pacers. Even just going back to the rest of the first round, Josh Christopher was like an absolute shock. For the Rockets there towards the end. Bones Highland out of VCU. Actually, I really like that pick for the Nuggets. I think there's a great value there. As Aaron Henry agrees to a 2-year deal with the 76ers, or a two-way deal, sorry. But even I thought for the Nets being such a great team as constructed, I thought they got better tonight. I mean, Cam Thomas is a guy that, although like the splits may not be there, like the dude is just a born scorer. And they tried to plug in Mike James to that role here in the playoffs. And now you got a guy with even more size that can score at a high clip. You get rid of Landry Shamet. He goes to Phoenix. So you need another guy that you can plug and play that can knock down shots. But then they get Day'Ron Sharpe too, who, is arguably the best rebounder in the draft. And you add more toughness to this Nets core that just has skill for days. So I really like what the Nets did in the draft. And but round two was so much fun. You talk about Jason Preston going off the board. Just his story is incredible. I love the pairing of Miles McBride in New York with Tibbs. I know we talked about that with Iowa, but there's another kind of blue collar guy that Jared Butler. I mean, how about him? I think he ended up with the Jazz. What a pickup that is at 40.
40.
It's insane. I mean, I like, you look at Levers as well. Zagorowski goes, a lot of these guys that I was actually working out with for pre-draft camp all really got drafted. So I'm sure that's another thing that he's excited about tonight. And overall, I thought it was a good showing for not only just, really just for the Big Ten. I thought the Big Ten just kind of really rounded out the draft there. Joe Wieskamp, we talked about it. Really high on him with his, 42-inch vertical leap or whatever it ended up being. Can shoot the heck out of it. And I think you and I were both talking earlier, like, you talk about him playing with the Spurs as well. I mean, you talk about ball movement, you talk about finding him for open shots. Like, I think he's going to have, a pretty standout rookie season as well.
One more, the biggest news of the night in the NBA, which this is full of MLB trades for people who care like me, as well. Is Russ to the Lakers so crazy it'll work, or is it so crazy that it's going to fall apart? Like I think it's really intriguing because him with AD and LeBron, like especially for a regular season, makes a ton of sense. I'm really interested to see how it works once it gets to the playoffs. Just as I'm interested to see how the Nets still work once that gets to the playoffs and if they're all healthy.
Yeah, the Russell Westbrook thing. I mean, I'm personally not crazy about it. And part of that is just I'm not crazy about Russell Westbrook. And that's nothing against him, or he obviously has the ability to fill the stat sheet. But come playoff time, things can get really stagnant with him. His shootings are typically not great, and I think if you're going to pair, it's the reason why Kyrie and LeBron worked. Is because Kyrie is such an efficient offensive player, so that when LeBron ends up being the one that's kind of taking the bulk of those, I guess initiating the offense and having the ball in his hands. You look at those Cavs teams over the years, and I'm speaking just really kind of what tends to work with LeBron is when LeBron had, like, the LeBron teams are typically constructed in one way. You have, two other superstars or maybe one other superstar, and then you really fill the rest of the team with vet guys that can knock down open shots. And that's why the Russell Westbrook aspect of it is just intriguing to me, and intriguing in a way that like I got to see it to believe it, that it's going to really work. And I say really work. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I think they can make a conference finals most likely. I mean, they still have LeBron James, even though I thought LeBron took a slight step back this year, as crazy it is to say that.
Finally, right? Just he's
Yeah,
huge.
I mean, he's what, it's the 18th year in the league, whatever it is. But I don't know. I mean, I think that team and the way that it's constructed, can you really rely on Anthony Davis to be healthy for an entire regular season, for an entire playoffs? LeBron's going into his 18th season, or 19th season, one of the two. I mean, either way, he's getting towards the end, as crazy as to say. But and then Westbrook is just kind of a guy that ends up being, for a guy that leads the league in assists, like he can be a ball stopper sometimes, and a lot of the LeBron James offensive are a little more, I don't want to say free flowing, because a lot of it runs through and is dictated by LeBron James. So when you're Russell Westbrook, like the space tends to be a little more condensed on the floor, because if you're LeBron, you're looking for those open gaps, you're looking for open men, you're looking for gaps to drive. And if Russell Westbrook's on the floor with you in an off the ball capacity, defenders can shrink the floor. So that's when playoff time, it becomes a huge question mark. Like I said, I mean, we talk about Io, like it's tough to count out Io. It's tough to count out LeBron James. Like it just is. Like
Yeah.
he tends to figure it out, and he's so savvy and smart in the way that he kind of puts his fingerprint on different things. So I'm not over the moon about the Russell Westbrook to the Lakers. I'm actually really interested to see what the Warriors do as well. I don't think that they're out of the woods yet in terms of their off-season moves, and I personally think that the Warriors are going to be right back up there next year with the way Steph was playing, Clay coming back. Draymond's not the Draymond of 2015, 2016. But the one thing Draymond does is mercilessly feed Steph. So I'm always on board for that.
I'd love to see Ben Simmons there. Like if people are that low on him now, like I just love that fit there. But yeah, I like the Russell Westbrook move for the regular season. I once it gets to playoff time.
That's the thing. Like Russ is gonna bring it. That's the one thing about Russ. Like Russ is gonna bring it every night, and I think it's going to be exciting in the regular season. I think with the Lakers found that's more important. If you can, they flew a little too close to the sun. That's no pun intended. Right. But they end up getting the 7 seed, and you're thinking, all right, we're the Lakers, we'll figure it out. We got Bron, we got AD, and like the Suns didn't care, and like home court advantage is a real thing. And I think having that precedent setting was like, hey, we need to perform in the regular season because we don't want to be a 7 seed again. Like that, all of that is extremely important. And I don't know that the Ben Simmons thing is interesting because honestly, and this hurts me because like I said, I'm a Warriors guy to my core. If Ben Simmons ends up on the Warriors, I'm not sure Draymond Green's still there.
I agree.
As crazy as that sounds, you can't, as much as Steph and Clay space the floor, you really just can't have Draymond and Ben Simmons being two guys that kind of just negate it with the way that they don't stretch the floor. And they make great plays, they're great defenders, but I'm not one for the crazy like Ben Simmons talk. I think his floor is incredible. I mean, you talk about his floor, he's a guy that he's 6'10", a guy that can play make and is a first team all league defender. Like, sign me up.
Right. It feels like everyone thinks he stinks now. And it's like, no, he's a top 30 player who's one of the best defenders in the league. It's just, he can't be the top 2 guy in a championship team, probably, right? He's not the initiator. Him and Gobert are similar in that, like, hey, if that guy's your number 2 guy, you're probably going to have trouble getting to a championship. But if he's your 3 guy, oh man, he's an unbelievable value.
Yeah, no question. I think the way that these teams are constructed now, like you have to have balance. And I think, and part of it too is it's going to be a change of scenery for a guy like Ben Simmons. And whether or not he is going to take ownership. I mentioned it with Io, and this is kind of like a full circle thing. The guys that have, and I'm not saying Ben Simmons isn't going to have a long shelf life in the NBA because he is, because he does, he has those translatable skills, but he's a guy that I've heard, through the grapevine doesn't invest as much in his own personal development. And that's the whole point. Like, if you don't do that, it's hard to fix those things. But I'll tie it back here because this is a point that I always like to make with guys that struggle to shoot the ball. It can be, because I saw it, and I'm not gonna like name names of certain guys that I played with in my career, but it's weird how the guys that don't shoot the ball well tend to be the guys that aren't in the gym as much working on their shot. And you could say like, oh, it's a work ethic thing, like, that's why he's not a good shooter. Well, yeah, maybe that's a factor, but at the same time, it is very demoralizing when you aren't a good shooter going into a gym and seeing yourself miss a bunch of shots. So people naturally shy away from that. Like, I'm not interested in going and shooting on the gun and shooting 48% and watching myself miss and having the ball pop out and going to chase it. So like, I'm just not going to go shoot.
Right.
And it ends up just being this cycle of struggling to really, break to build. And a lot of these guys, I don't say a lot of these guys, but there are people in this world, doesn't matter if it's basketball or whether it's your job or whatever it may be. Some people are afraid to do that break to build because those two steps back to take four forward, like, you don't want to see yourself when you're taking those two steps back because it damages your confidence and it damages how you view yourself. And that can be what hinders a lot of these players. And I think that's part of what Ben Simmons is going through is like, yeah, well, shoot, I know I want to be a good 3-point shooter too, but I also don't want to go into the gym and see myself miss for 2 straight hours.
Yeah.
So he'll right the ship. Like, he's a good enough player. He's skilled enough to have a long NBA career. And I think he just needs to find his niche on a team where he's not counted on and having the city on his shoulders. And I think whether that's a Golden State, whether that's a Portland, like, I think those are both good spots for him to flourish.
Yeah, another reason to watch the NBA right now, for people who don't, is because it is unpredictable. I think, like, yeah, I think Brooklyn has the best odds if they're healthy, and I think the Lakers and Clippers are really, really good. But Milwaukee's good. Phoenix has another season. Like, Dallas is coming, right? And Luka and doing what he's doing. Portland, another place I'd love to see Ben Simmons if he wants to go there. Like, is really, really good. Philadelphia still, if they make a move and make the right move, they can do it. So like, there's so many teams that can win a championship, Mike.
And I'll make this point too, because I think what the Suns did this year, going from not making the playoffs to going to the finals, I think that was like a little bit of fool's gold. And when I say fool's gold, like, they're a great team. I think you got DeAndre Ayton's a future All-Star, if not next year. Devin Booker's an All-Star. Chris Paul's an All-Star. But I think what the Suns are going to end up doing is convincing some teams that they're closer than they think, or that they're closer than they are.
Right. I mean, they went through a Jamal Murray-less Nuggets, a Kawhi Leonard-less Clippers, a Anthony Davis-less Lakers, right? Like, so they got some breaks along the way.
Yeah, and of course, and like that always happens, like when you get to a championship, or when you get to the NBA Finals. But I think what the Suns might end up doing, and I think honestly Portland did it a couple times too, where they made the conference finals, but it'll fool some front offices into thinking that, like, oh no, we're right there. Like, we need to go out and get this free agent acquisition, and then we'll be right where the Suns were, up 2-0 in the NBA Finals. And that's typically not how it works. I mean, you talk about the injuries the Nets had, the injuries the Warriors had. Like, it was a very, very off-kilter year. And now all of a sudden it's like, oh no, these guys are back now. The Bucks obviously won a championship, and if they keep that core together, they'll be right up there competing in the East again. Like, it is not easy to just be like, oh no, we're close. Don't. And I'm not saying blow it up, but it's. The Suns thing is interesting to me because I think an element of it is, the Suns aren't just like some crappy team that made a Cinderella run. Like, that team's got some dudes. I mean, you go down the list. I mentioned it: DeAndre Ayton, Devin Booker, Chris Paul, Jay Crowder will help you win no matter where you're at. Jay Crowder was in the finals last year, and then you got Cam Johnson, who is Cam Johnson and Mikal Bridges are so invaluable, and I honestly wish that the Bulls had one of them because, and I say that just because they are so elite, catch and shoot threes and cutting. And like those two skills are so valuable, and they defend those. If you can do those three things at their size and with their skill level, like shoot, you'll end up in the NBA finals. Like it's just kind of what happens. But
Awesome. Well, hey, Mike, appreciate it, man. I knew we'd have fun talking some hoops, and maybe more. Illini fans will watch a little bit more of the NBA. Sadly, it might be more Chicago Bulls games. But hey, that's okay. Like Nikola Vucevic and Zach LaVine are pretty fun to watch. But great for Io to land in Chicago, and these draft nights are always so much fun to see these guys' dreams come true. And thanks for breaking it down, man. We appreciate it as always.
yeah, what a night, man. It was fun. It was awesome. Awesome chatting with you, man, as always.